Okay, well, thank you. I will go ahead and take over the screen and we'll go from there. Thank you, Lindsay. Okay, so let's get started on this. So I'm going to be talking today about COVID-19 and the vaccines and what the future of this year looks like as far as vaccines and safety, et cetera. So just a disclaimer, I think this is very important, that I don't work for and have any financial relationship with any of the vaccine producers discussed in this presentation. The information presented is not medical advice. If you need medical advice, I strongly encourage you to talk to your physician and/or healthcare providers. As Lindsay had noted, please hold your questions until the end of the presentation so everyone can hear the questions and the responses. I also encourage you to write down your question so you don't have to remember it until the end of the webinar. So that means putting it into the chat or the question and answer process. The full webinar and the question and answer session will be recorded, and we will post on the Western Neuropathy Association website all this information in about a week or so. Again, a little bit more about my background. I am a trained clinical laboratory microbiologist. I was a captain in the United States Air Force and worked in the Biomedical Science Corps. And as Lindsay mentioned, I was director of the Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine at UC Davis Medical Center in Sacramento for over 20 years. And I retired as a clinical laboratory medicine after 45 years in some working. So we're going to talk a little bit about human viruses and all this about disease. So viruses and human disease. Just so you know, there are over 1.7 million known virus species. But today there's only about 219 species that infect humans. All viruses are either DNA or RNA, and that's what is used to carry the genetic code for the virus. 2/3 of all viruses are from mammalian or bird origin. The first virus recognized in human infection was yellow virus, the flavivirus, in 1901. So it hasn't been that long since we've actually identified that there is such a thing as a virus. Coronavirus has only recently begun infecting humans. Typically, coronaviruses infect animals, but as we know now, they have evolved and infected, some of them have evolved to infect humans. The coronaviruses that are known to cause human disease are really 3 of them that are the main ones that cause disease. SARS-CoV-2, or severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19. SARS-CoV-1, or just simply CoV, is also caused a severe acute respiratory syndrome in the early 2000s. MERS-CoV is a similar kind of virus that also caused a pandemic in the early 2000s in the Middle Eastern part of the world, is called the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome. So severe acute respiratory coronavirus 2 is an RNA virus. I mentioned earlier that they're either DNA or RNA. This means that the virus is composed of a couple of main components: ribonucleic acid, or RNA, which carries all the genetic material, and protein that surrounds and connects the virus to the cell that it infects. And there's a good example, or a good nice photo or image right next to you in this slide. Some other RNA viruses that you're probably familiar with that you don't realize are RNA viruses are the measles, the mumps, polio, hepatitis, influenza, rabies, West Nile virus, and a slew of other ones. So here's a little bit of a view of what the virus looks like. On the left side, you will see an electron micrograph, meaning an electron microscope image of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And you can see the spike proteins around it. Those are the little things that stick out. And then the remaining part of the diagram, or the illustration, is a diagram of the virus. And I wanted to show this so you can get a much better understanding of the virus. Basically, the virus has 2 main components. The inner area of the virus is composed of ribonucleic acid, or RNA, and that RNA holds all of the genes that are necessary for the virus to replicate, including the spike protein gene and whatever other genes are necessary. Surrounding and protecting this ribonucleic acid are multiple protein coats, and then these spike proteins. And these spike proteins are the protein that actually attaches itself to the human cell or to the cells that the virus is going to infect. So COVID-19 disease syndrome, and how is it transmitted? Well, it's primarily exposure to respiratory droplets carrying infectious virus. There are some surfaces harboring the virus for up to 4 to 7 hours, depending on the surface, and have the potential for infection, but they're much less than the respiratory droplets. Another thing that's really important to understand about the disease syndrome is that the asymptomatic people involved with this are 40 to 45% of those infected, which means you don't even know you have an infection, so it's really easy for you to spread the disease. Disease symptoms can include, and the most important is pneumonia. It also includes fever, chills, cough, fatigue, shortness of breath, or difficulty breathing. And that's what gets people, as it gets more into that, you end up on ventilators in hospitals. Loss of taste or smell, and although this has been something that's been touted a lot, it's actually a very small percentage of people, maybe less than 10% of the people who have COVID-19 actually have loss of taste or smell. Could have a sore throat, congestion, runny nose, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, headache, muscle or body aches. These symptoms can be anything from mild to very severe. Definitive diagnosis requires a nasal swab or saliva PCR test for the viral antigen. So it's very specific to COVID-19 or the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So let's talk a little bit about conditions that increase severity of COVID-19 disease. And you've heard a lot about some of this, but I want to focus a little bit just to remind everybody. If you have hypertension, or if you're obese, or if you have cardiovascular disease of any kind, diabetes, chronic pulmonary disease of any kind, renal diseases, immunocompromised diseases, or you're immunocompromised, neurologic and neurodevelopmental disability, and even liver disease have impacted the severity of the disease for those who actually come down with the disease and have these conditions. Here's an example or some information about US mortality, mortality by age and what's going on right now. So this particular chart was put together when the death rate was only 301,679. And you can see from the chart, the ages on the left side from under 1 year all the way to over to 85 years and older. As you can see, the vast majority of deaths occur beyond 35 years to all the way past 85 years. And of course, the largest groups are in the more elder areas of the chart, or those who are much more up there in age, like some of us. So this is a good example and a good information to make you really understand that it's very important to protect yourself, particularly if you're in these age groups. For that matter, you should protect yourself regardless of what age group you're in. Current US COVID-19 infection rate and deaths are on the right side. As of today, 21,650,760 Americans have been infected, and 366,881 Americans have died. And today, more than 3,000 Americans die every single day of this disease. So the best way to deal with this disease is through vaccination. And vaccination is the most effective way to prevent disease caused by a virus. Antibiotics cure infections, but they do not kill viruses. Vaccines prevent disease, but do not cure diseases. This is a very important thing to understand. For example, the vaccines the measles vaccine has reduced the death rate from 2.6 million to less than 73,000 per year. The smallpox vaccine has eradicated the disease that killed more than 100 million people in the 20th century. The more people vaccinated, the less disease and the less death due to the disease. So vaccines and clinical trials. I think this is an area that people need to understand a little bit about, because it gives you a better understanding of how vaccines are evaluated and approved. Vaccines in the United States must successfully complete clinical trials. Now, these clinical trials are set up and defined by the FDA. So there are three main phases in clinical trials. Whether it's a vaccine or whether it's a drug, they also have to go through all these. Phase 1 in the clinical trials is approximately 20 to 100 volunteers test the safety and the dose of what is being tested. In phase 2 of clinical trials, hundreds test the effectiveness and side effects. And if that is successful, then we move on to phase 3 of the clinical trials, where thousands are further tested for safety and effectiveness, and many are included that have to do with diverse populations that may be affected or may use the drug or be affected by the vaccine. For example, people over age 65, those with chronic conditions, some of which we've already talked about, essential workers, and those who are economically disadvantaged. So talk now about specifically about COVID-19 vaccines. One of the interesting things is that right now worldwide, there are more than 60 COVID-19 vaccines under development using a wide array of vaccine technologies. We're going to talk about 4 of those vaccines and the technologies with those 4. So the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which is FDA approved and now being used in vaccinating individuals, and the Moderna vaccine also now being used and FDA approved. The other 2, the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, are included because they are the most likely vaccines to be approved next. So I thought I should give you an idea what those vaccines are and how they're developed. The Pfizer-BioNTech and the Moderna vaccines both use something called messenger RNA or ribonucleic acid to create the viral protein. And then the viral protein, it stimulates your immune system to create antibodies to fight the virus and develop long-term immunity. The diagram on the right shows a messenger RNA building protein to stimulate the immune system. It's the messenger RNA that's actually the vaccine. It's actually injected into your cells through the inoculation, and then starts building these viral proteins that then are identified by the cell as foreign. And then that then results in the creation of antibodies and long-term immunity. The Pfizer vaccine was the very first one approved, and then within about a month later, the Moderna vaccine was approved. These 2 vaccines went through clinical trials, and they actually were tested on over 44,000 participants in the United States at multiple sites within the United States. Both vaccines are 95 to 97% effective. They both require 2 doses. The Pfizer requires a 21-day difference between the first and second, and the Moderna 28 days between the first and second dose. The AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccines are a little bit different. They use an adenovirus, or a type of virus that causes the common cold. And the adenovirus is modified with a coronavirus gene to create viral protein, and basically does the same thing as the other 2 in that it is the viral protein that stimulates the immune system to create antibodies to fight off the virus and develop long-term immunity. The diagram on the lower right is a diagram of an adenovirus. And what they've done is they've actually taken the protein RNA from the SARS-CoV-2 virus and inserted it, the messenger RNA, into the adenovirus. And then the adenovirus is the actual vaccine. Your cells then destroy the adenovirus, open up the viral gene that's in there, and then that gene then generates the protein that results in the stimulus to the antibody system. Both vaccines are still pending approval, but I think they will probably both be approved within the next month, or maybe a little bit longer. Again, the clinical trials have been performed on 35 to 60,000 participants in multiple sites across the United States. They are both 90 to 97% effective. The AstraZeneca vaccine requires 2 doses, 21 days apart. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine requires a single dose, but they also have a double dose process, which hasn't yet been completely defined by Johnson & Johnson. So let's talk a little bit about vaccine side effects, because that's a concern that many people have. So one thing everyone should understand is that all vaccinations have some side effects. They oftentimes cause headaches, fatigue, soreness at the injection site, chills, fever, muscle aches, and even swollen lymph nodes. So one of the things that you should also be concerned about is that when you have different concerns, you should be talking to your physician about whether or not your concerns should put you at risk relative to the vaccine. So some of the things that have come up in various media and other information are these that I've listed here. Previous allergic reaction to vaccines. So you've heard that people have had allergic responses. Well, I think that's something you need to make sure that you've talked to your physician about, particularly if you already had any. If you have HIV or a weakened immune system, I think it's important to also discuss that with your physician. Bell's palsy is another thing that's been identified, but has really not shown to be a real side effect. But still, if you've ever had Bell's palsy or are concerned about it, talk to your physician. If you have epilepsy, talk to your physician. And if you have a severe neurologic disease such as Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease, you should also consult with your physician. One of the things that's been pretty clear as far as the CDC is concerned is that if you have a history of autoimmune diseases or an severe autoimmune disease, you may not be eligible for the vaccine. Again, talk with your physician. CDC guidelines for vaccine rollout, some of which you've already heard lots of, but in December of 2020, the first phase of the rollout, which was the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, have gone to healthcare workers and those in long-term nursing care facilities. The second phase is designed and is about to start for giving vaccines to essential workers such as the police, the firefighters, grocery store workers who are out there working in front of us all over the place, teachers, and those ages 75 and older. So, however, the rollout has been slow and not every state is following the CDC guidelines. Some of them have decided to do something a little different, not significantly different, but a little bit different. January, February, right now, it looks like that the CDC guidelines are ready to go with the third phase. That is to vaccinate those ages 65 to 74 and those between ages 16 and 64 with underlying medical conditions. And we've already identified most of those underlying medical conditions previously. Later on in the year, hopefully in March or April, or maybe May, the fourth and fifth phases of the vaccine rollout will happen. And that is there will be a focus on 50 to 64-year-olds. And then after that, there'll be the rest of the entire population. The one thing you need to remember that I think is really important is that the full implementation will take many months. And that's something that we have to keep in mind throughout this year. Well, the other thing that's come up a lot and that people are very concerned about are viral mutations. And you've heard a number of things in the media about this. One of the things I think it's very important to understand that every virus mutates. It's part of the virus's life cycle. SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, is an RNA virus, as I mentioned. RNA viruses like the flu and the measles and more are more prone to changes and mutations compared to DNA viruses, such as herpes, smallpox, and human papillomavirus. Now, the interesting part and the more important part is that researchers have already identified 14 different strains of SARS-CoV-2, which are strains or mutations, and released these findings to those working on vaccines and treatments. So a recent mutation, though, has caused a lot of issues, and it appears to make the SARS-CoV-2 virus more infectious. However, these changes do not mean the vaccines are less effective or that COVID-19 will cause more deaths or more severe disease. And until we actually know more, you shouldn't panic or feel uncomfortable about it. Here's an example or a diagram of the current issue relative to the COVID-19 mutation, and it mostly has to do with those spike proteins I talked about. Those are the proteins that actually are used to connect to the cell. And there's been a slight change in the 3 amino acids chain that actually builds these particular spike proteins and therefore are a little more sticky on human cells. Another question is, how long will immunity last? Well, vaccines confer memory. If a person no longer has high levels of antibodies, certain cells mobilize and come into action when they detect a viral infection. So your previous vaccine does exactly that. It actually creates these memory cells. Vaccines for measles, mumps, and rubella, which are also RNA viruses, have been used for more than 45 years to provide immunity successfully. COVID-19 vaccines will most likely protect people against the vast majority of the circulating strains and even for the majority of mutations. The other thing to remember, and like if you are old enough, you can remember things like the polio virus and a number of other viruses. Booster vaccines and and modified vaccines will be made when needed, and we've had that in the past also. So one of the last part of this presentation, I really want to talk a little bit about myths and misconceptions concerning the vaccines. So the myths and misconceptions, number one, the vaccine isn't safe because it was developed so quickly. Well, each vaccine had to complete the full clinical trial testing that I defined earlier. The FDA had to review and approve each vaccine based on the massive amount of data provided through those clinical trials. So there were really no shortcuts have been taken to develop these. Yes, the process was expedited because a vast number of scientists came together to rapidly develop effective vaccines to meet the emergency needs of the world. And there are more going on to develop more vaccines besides. The processes used to develop the COVID-19 vaccines will also be used as a template for future disease outbreaks as viruses evolve to go from animals to humans. Myths and misconceptions number two, the COVID-19 vaccine will give you COVID-19. The vaccines do not contain the SARS-CoV-2 virus and therefore cannot give you COVID-19. Vaccines contain a fragment of viral genetic information to generate viral protein only. The virus protein is seen as an intruder by your immune system. Over weeks, your immune system builds antibodies to destroy the virus because it is the protein that surrounds the virus. Myths and misconceptions number three, the COVID-19 vaccine will alter your DNA. Each vaccine contains a fragment of the virus's genetic material, but no DNA. This viral material is RNA. It will not interact with DNA. Myths and misconceptions number four, the vaccine will make you more vulnerable to other diseases. Vaccines do not suppress the body's immune system, they activate it. COVID-19 vaccines don't contain live viruses that could make you sick. The vaccines simply trigger the body to identify the virus, and your immune system builds antibodies to kill the virus. Myths and misconceptions number five, the vaccines have dangerous side effects. Vaccines often cause short-lived mild headaches, chills, fatigue, muscle pain, or fever for a couple of days after injection. When a COVID-19 vaccine enters your body, your innate immune system reacts. Thus, elevated temperatures, headaches, or body aches occur because the vaccine is triggering an immune response. If you have any underlying conditions, consult your physician before taking the vaccine. Myths and misconceptions number six, there won't be any need to wear a mask after a person is vaccinated. All safety precautions, including mask wearing, will need to be followed until a significant number of people have been vaccinated and transmission is significantly reduced. Additionally, vaccination of the population will take months, and there isn't enough information to say those vaccinated cannot still carry and transmit the virus to others even though they don't have the disease. Myths and misconceptions number seven, if someone has COVID-19 already, they don't need to take or have the vaccine or get the vaccine. Well, the CDC recommends even those who have had COVID-19 once should be vaccinated. Your natural immunity varies from person to person and may be short-lived. There are documented cases of reinfection in multiple age groups. Lastly, the myths and misconceptions number 8. The COVID-19 vaccine will completely stop the pandemic. This is not true. Although the vaccine will protect us from COVID-19 and minimize deaths, not all will agree to be vaccinated. Everyone cannot be vaccinated simultaneously, and it will take months. We will need to continue to follow all safety measures until most of the population has been vaccinated. So for the rest of this year, and at least for most of this year, we're going to really need to look at prevention of COVID-19 as we have in the last 9 to 12 months, to protect yourself, your loved ones, your friends, and those you interact with. Stay home, avoid travel and gatherings with others outside your household. Wear a mask. Make sure it covers your mouth and your nose. Avoid touching the front of your mask and don't pull it up or down to talk, cough, or use your phone. You should social distance for 6 feet or more. And please also wash your hands frequently. These are the steps that you can do on a regular basis to minimize you getting the disease and for you minimizing giving the disease to someone else. Some resources I thought that might be really helpful to you and that you could find out a lot more information about both the virus, the disease, and the vaccines. They're readily available. And that is, you can talk to your physician or your healthcare provider and ask whatever questions you need and want to ask, particularly about concerns you have of your own relative to underlying causes or other types of problems or issues or concerns. You can also look up a variety of information on a number of websites. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the website is listed here. The California Department of Public Health, and that website is listed there. Medscape, which is a medical website, also is listed there with good resources for coronavirus, and the National Institutes of Health. All of these websites have lots of information on COVID-19, the virus, and vaccination and vaccines. And I really encourage you to look into these, particularly if you have interest and want more information. Again, just a reminder, the information I presented here is not medical advice. When you need medical advice, I strongly encourage you to talk with your physician and or your healthcare provider. And at this point, I think we can now start to take some questions if there are any.
All righty. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Daryl. Let's see, I've got a couple of questions so far. So anybody that has any, please feel free to go ahead and submit those now, and we'll address those one at a time. All right, so the first question we have is, has the vaccine been tested on individuals with autoimmune disease, or were they excluded from the trials?
I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that the people who are performing the testing decided that the condition was so severe or so potentially severe that they recommend that they not be vaccinated without complete evaluation. So I would say you need to really talk to your physician about that.
Okay, and then we have another question just asking about access to the copies of your slides that you presented today.
Well, they'll be on the website, I believe.
So we will be taking the presentation. Yeah, well, yep. So what you see today, we're going to have that available at the same time that the recording is available. So we will add that to the website along with a video link to rewatch this webinar. So that way you guys can share it if you have somebody that you think might benefit from the information, or just to rewatch it yourself. Yeah. We'll have those. Hopefully we'll have that all posted, I'm thinking by early next week at the very latest. So, and we'll send a reminder out to everybody that attended today and let them know that it's available.
Let me also add that if there's any individual watching that would actually like a presentation of this to another group using Zoom, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Yeah, that'd be good. I think a lot of people maybe that couldn't join today would definitely benefit from the information. So absolutely, this can be rebroadcast, or as Daryl said, he's available to provide the presentation to a different group if you would like. Let's see, I got one more question. What is the false positivity rate for the PCRN test?
Wow, it depends a lot on the individual tests. Now, most of the PCR tests are about 95 to 98% correct and accurate and precise. There are a few that have been shown to be less than that. Most of the problems are not the testing, but the way that it's being used by those doing the test. If you don't follow the instructions to the letter, it is not necessarily an effective test. For that matter, recently I saw an article in Medscape that said that a particular brand should be questioned as to if it's a false negative. In other words, if there's a negative and the physician believes that this may still be COVID-19, it may really be COVID-19 and the test result may be a false negative. So that can happen. It just doesn't happen very often. And most of the errors, like I said, are the user that's actually either collecting the specimen incorrectly or the test is being run incorrectly.
All right, I've got a couple more that just came up. This question is, if you have had COVID-19, how long should you wait before getting the vaccine?
If you're in the group that I've talked about and the sequences, that'll depend on the length of time and availability of the vaccine. If the vaccine is available now to you and you've had COVID-19, you have any concern, talk to your physician. But the CDC does recommend that taking the vaccine will do nothing more than strengthen your immunity to the disease.
Perfect. Okay, and then we have another one about the vaccine relating to peripheral neuropathy. Is there any concern about it being unsafe for people with PN?
I have not seen anything in the literature and not heard any discussions that relate to peripheral neuropathy being an underlying cause or problem. Now, the peripheral neuropathies that are autoimmune diseases that relate to autoimmune diseases, that's another thing to be concerned about, though. But that's usually, but a very, very, very limited number of types of disease.
Yeah, smaller population there to
very small
consider. Yes. Okay, so that was it for the questions. If anybody else has any, go ahead and send them my way. Otherwise, that should be it.
Well, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to provide me, that you provided me to give this information out. And I'm hoping that it helps and that I'm hoping for a much better 2021, just like all of you are also. So thank you again.
All right, that's it for today. So again, we will have this recording available in the coming days, along with a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. So keep your eyes peeled for an email from me, and I'll announce that to you guys when that's available. Otherwise, that's it for us today. I hope you guys are all staying safe and warm. And if you go out, wear a mask. And
yes,
don't forget to socially distance and keep yourself safe as well. All right, you guys, that's it for us.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone. Thank you.